Sally, I'm an alcoholic. Thanks, Jenna. So I'm just going to say I'm feeling very, very fearful. I always get fearful of sharing. I think because I always try to overcomplicate things in my mind, but like I need to remind myself it's not about me, it's about carrying a message, and that's what I'm going to try and do today. I feel like 36 years is a long time to kind of share in such a short amount of time, but like I'm just going to try and keep it simple and just share my experience. So for me, I find it kind of weird that I'm sitting in an AA meeting sharing my milestone, because I didn't identify as an alcoholic. Going into treatment, I knew I was an addict, but I didn't. I remember thinking to myself, I'm not identifying as an alcoholic. I've come in here with one problem. I'm not willing to walk out here with two. And I very quickly had to learn, when I was speaking to my sponsor, she was explaining to me that it's all the same disease. It's just that our disease latches onto different things or progresses in different areas, but it's all one disease really. And it was only in sitting in Big Book one day, in the treatment center that I went to, where we did a study on the Big Book, that I was reading. I think at that stage I was still looking at a lot of the differences, and it was when we got to Bill Wilson's story that I kind of started to identify. I could relate to so much, even though our lives were completely different, there were so many similarities, and that's when I finally realized, that I'm an alcoholic. And it wasn't the fact that I hadn't, because I hadn't drank in quite a long time by the time I got into treatment, because I remember my sponsor saying to me, Sally, you're not drinking at the moment because you're on all this kind of medication, and if you weren't on medication, you'd be drinking. And it was at that time that I sort of realized, okay, even though I hadn't been drinking a long time, I still had the alcoholic behavior, which was very prominent from a young age. And when I look back in hindsight, when my first substance of choice was definitely alcohol, and that was very prominent in my life for a very long time. So going back to when I was younger, I grew up in the East Rand in Johannesburg. I kind of moved around a lot there. I remember being a very extremely fearful child. I came from a dysfunctional family. There was a lot of, my father was an alcoholic and an addict, and there was a lot of abuse and violence in our house. But I seem to say, when I look at that, my perception of my childhood is very different to my perception of my mom and my sister's perception of my childhood, which shows me really that my perception of reality was warped. In my mind, I seem to have blocked out a lot of the stuff that went on in our home. In my mind, I thought I had a happy childhood, but the reality is that, I come from a family of alcoholics and addicts, and this is a family disease. So getting into primary school, I never really felt a part of. I was quite academic, and I did really well in school, and I did really well in school, and I got involved in school activities and that, but when I look at it, my disease had already progressed because it progressed through food. I started picking up a lot of weight at a very young age. I was bullied for that, but I think I got to a point where I could sort of, and I was always trying to seek this, trying to feel accepted, trying to seek this approval or affirmation, or kind of, always needing people's approval to kind of feel okay and a part of. And I found eventually that I could sort of do that because I could lie and manipulate, and I could, like a typical chameleon, I could change. I could change depending on who I was around, and I could kind of maneuver into different friends groups. And I could also deflect with humor. I found that if I could be funny, then I thought people would like me. I would also tell these ridiculous lies, like I had a brother that didn't exist, and that went on for years. Friends would come and say, "Where's your brother?" I say, "Oh no, he's out with friends," or he's, and I don't know how I thought people actually thought this stuff, that this stuff was real. But I suppose that was my reality at the time. And then I kind of, as I said, in school, primary school, I did really, really well. And eventually I got to a point where, so I had this best friend, and I always thought I was just really competitive, because I always had to be one up on her. Because I always felt that she was prettier than me, or she was better at school or at sports, and I always felt like I had to strive to be better, you know, and I just thought at the time that I was just really competitive. When I look at it now, I was actually really jealous. Jealousy was a big defect for me, and it kind of, when we got to standard 5 or grade 7, I thought I was going to be head girl, and I wasn't. She was chosen as head girl, and I remember thinking, F the system, I've tried so hard, and you know, what for? And it was all that self-pity victim worries me, and I thought, well, stuff that, I'm going to rebel. And that's kind of how I carried on my life going into high school. I started hanging around with a lot of friends that were like me. I got involved in drinking. I picked up my first drink at the age of 14, and I drank to blackouts. You know, my friends at that stage, we would, you know, I think we were all sort of trying to be mischievous at the time, and we would all like sneak 1 or 2 drinks here and there. But for me, you know, it was never, I always had to go to the other end, you know, of passing out and getting sick. And I could never just, you know, do things normally like other people did. I always had to go to extremes. And then kind of through high school, then eventually I got involved in a group of friends that were doing drugs. Funny enough, I never really liked the street drugs. I think I always had that awareness because my father was an addict, that I always was like, oh, maybe that's not a good idea. But, you know, and the funny thing is, my friends that were doing, like, they were skipping school to do drugs and things like that, and I wasn't doing that, and I thought, oh my goodness, they have a problem, you know. It was never me. I was always looking at everybody else, but yeah, at that time, and it just baffles me how I'm, funny enough, the one who ended up in rehab. And they're all living functioning lives today. So that still baffles me today. So then I was like, okay, well, those friends in that school is the problem. So I manipulated my parents. At the time we were living in Kempton, I manipulated them to sell their house and move houses to Edenvale so that I could go to school in Edenvale because, you know, Kempton was the problem. And but you know, when I went there, I carried me with me, and I kind of got involved. I got involved with another group of friends, and even though they weren't doing substances, there was a lot of drinking involved. But there again, then the behaviour started again, the lies, you know, and I think for me, all of just trying to do stuff to get people to like me, really. And I mean, at the end of the day, it was mad because they actually ended up not liking me because of it. Eventually I was like, okay, well, this school is now a problem and these people are a problem. So then I manipulated my parents to let me leave and go to college. I went and I studied beauty. And then I met somebody who I completely and absolutely fell in love with. And at that stage, my disease then started to progress into relationships. I started fixing off people, and you know, for me, I made this person my higher power, really. You know, we say in the program, we go to any lengths for drugs and alcohol. Well, at that stage, I would go to any lengths for this person. And I remember my friend saying to me, like, Sally, you've got to stop. Like, you know, what you're doing is not okay. Like, this person had become like an obsession in my life. And I didn't care about who I hurt or who I used to try and get closer to this person, or what I did, or, you know, to just try and get this person to like me or love me or whatever it was. You know, I didn't care because it was all about me, my selfish self-centeredness. Eventually, you know, that didn't end very well. That person actually wanted nothing to do with me in the end. And then I found myself in another relationship, a very toxic, abusive relationship, which kind of carried on for 5 years. And when I think about it now, like, you know, this person, what I put my parents through, what I put my family through with this person, it was really, because it caused a lot of chaos. But you know, I didn't care. For me, it was all about me and what Sally wanted and what Sally needed in their life. And I couldn't really be bothered with what my family was going through, you know. Anyway, fast forward a little bit. Eventually, at 25 years old, I had a gastric sleeve operation because at that point I was 157 kgs. And like it's like with alcohol, you know, I couldn't stop. I just couldn't stop eating. Eventually, my parents sent me to have a gastric sleeve operation, and I started to lose all of the weight, and things started to get a little bit better, but like I still felt really empty inside, like something was missing. I was never happy. I always felt like there was just this void inside of me that and I was always looking for something to fill it. But at that time, there again, I still didn't identify that I had a problem, because they told me after the operation that I wouldn't be able to drink. And I thought, okay, that's fine, and I did it. I managed to go through a year without drinking, until my dad died suddenly, and it was very traumatic for me, because my dad was my higher power. At that stage, he was my everything. I was daddy's girl, and that really destroyed me. But there again, I made it all about me, not thinking about my mom, who's just lost her partner of 33 years. My sister also lost her dad. It was really all just about me, and I became a self-pity victim. I think at that stage I thought I was a victim of life, really. It was always like, my life's so bad, and if you were like me, you're drinking used to, and I used all these excuses. At that stage I hadn't drank for a year, and on my dad's funeral I picked up a drink for the first time, and I got completely out of it. My mom had to look after me. She's trying to run this funeral, and she has to worry about her drunk daughter. It's just incredibly selfish. But anyway, I managed through that though to kind of end that relationship, and by that stage I was like, okay, well, I don't want to live here anymore. Eating environment is the problem. I'm going to move to Benoni, and this is where I thought I could sort of create a new identity, because I'd lost all the weight at that stage, and I kind of moved there hoping that things would be different and things would change, and nobody knew me then. I could sort of create this new life, and I went there, and that place, well, not that place, but eventually reached my rock bottom there. For 2 years I spent a lot of drinking, a lot of partying. I'd gotten a really good job at that stage, which I eventually lost, because I was always rocking up to work hungover or still drunk from the night before. I then started getting a lot of attention because I'd lost a lot of weight, and I started fixing with my looks, and I got a lot of attention from males, and I loved that. I fixed with that attention, that affirmation. And then eventually, and then I would change also depending on, because at that stage I had a lot of different groups of friends, and I would change depending on even what I was using, whatever substance I was using would change depending on what type of friends I was hanging around with at the time. If I was hanging around with those friends, I'd do psychedelics. If I was hanging around with those friends, I'd do stimulants. If I was with my normal group of friends, it would just be alcohol. And I kind of that chameleon, that I could hang around. If at one stage, if I was dating, so when I'd lost all the weight and that, I dated this guy that was very much into gym and fitness, and I went and I studied Pilates, and I kind of lived that life. And when he said to me, Sally, I think your drinking's a problem, you need to stop. And I was like, no, you're trying to control me, because at the end of the day, I wanted to do what I wanted to do, and I wasn't willing to listen to what anybody else had to say. And, there again, that relationship ended badly. I got into another one, and this is just kind of how it carried on, the cycle, Eventually, my friends stopped wanting to hang around me, because, they stopped inviting me out, because I was always just a mess, I was always that girl that wanted to drink and party and go to extremes, and just completely make a fool of myself. When I look back at it now, I just want to cringe. So eventually I met my current partner, my fiance. We've been together 8 years. He doesn't drink or use. In my mind, I suppose, I don't know what a normal functioning person should be, I think. And I created a lot of chaos in his life. I still don't know how we're still together today. I created a lot of chaos. The first year I was still just drinking and partying and stuff, and eventually he said to me, listen, I don't think, I don't really approve of your lifestyle, and what you're doing is not okay. You're damaging yourself, you're making an ass out of yourself in front of everybody. And, again there, I was like, who are you to tell me, that ego, that arrogance, like, who do you think you are? And then she said to me, look, if you're going to carry on, like, I want to end things. Like, I don't want to be a part of this, and, but that's up to you. And at that stage, I made the decision to stop, because I could at that stage, and that's why I didn't think that I had a problem. So even though, my life was mad, I still didn't think I had a problem because I could stop. But what I didn't realize is that, it's not that I wasn't an alcoholic, it's just that my disease hadn't progressed yet, it hadn't progressed into full blown. So at that stage I was able to stop for, I don't know, a couple of months, probably 10, 11 months. And during that time I got a really good job, I got on to study. My sister during that time, she's also like me, she also suffers from this disease. Her life had become unmanageable, and she was going through a divorce, and I kind of swooped in there, thought I was going to be the savior, because I like to try and fix and rescue people, and I went in there and I kind of tried to assume financial responsibility and look after her kids and take on all her stuff, and then I became really angry and resentful about it. And even though outside I sort of gave this appearance of that I was doing really well and everything was, okay, but on the inside, like, I wasn't okay. Again, I had this void. I felt like something was always missing. And in that time, and this shows me about the alcoholic behavior, because even though I was clean and sober at the time, I wasn't using anything, I became extremely controlling, jealous, very possessive, just not a nice person, and that shows me that even without substances, like I have the alcoholic behavior. And eventually I managed to keep that up for about 10, 11 months, and then I couldn't anymore. I eventually, my partner, I started drinking again, and my partner left me, and I got completely out of it, and I went to his house one night, and I caused such a scene that his mom had to come and she had to get the security to remove me off the property. And eventually he switched off his phone for 5 weeks. I had absolutely no contact with him, and for me that's where my life started to fall apart. I no longer had this fix anymore, and that's when I started on I went full blown into active. I went to go see a doctor, and they put me on all this medication. And at the time I was drinking and using the medication, I would go to blackouts. I would go 2-3 days without being able to remember anything, what I'd done. I remember being extremely fearful, thinking I need to go shopping, and I'd open my kitchen cupboards, and my cupboards were full. And I couldn't remember that I'd gone to the shops the day before. I also remember waking up one day, I'd also blacked out. I don't know how long I was out for, but I woke up and I had 2 black eyes and cuts all over my arms. And I couldn't account for what I'd done. I knew that I was at home, and I couldn't understand what had happened. And what had actually happened is I'd had a seizure, and I'd hit my head and on the door frame, and I'd gotten 2 black eyes. And eventually at that point my family was like, listen, you're harmed to yourself, and you need to go into hospital. They put me in a psychiatric ward, my first psychiatric ward in a government hospital, which was not nice. And I remember at the time, the psychologist saying to me, they gave me these labels, like manic depressive, and I liked that because I was like, oh, okay, that's what's wrong with me, I'm a manic depressive. And they gave me all this medication. I was like, okay, great. And she was like, okay, but listen, you can't drink on this. Like, this is the problem. And I thought, okay, that's the problem. Like, I'm drinking and mixing medication. That's my problem. So I'm going to stop drinking, and I'm just going to carry on with medication. And within 3 months, I was in full-blown active addiction. What had happened is the doctor they would give me a month's script, and within a week, was finished, and in that time I'd found a pharmacy where you didn't need a script, that's where my disease really, really started to progress. I remember trying to stop, and I couldn't. The withdrawals were so severe. Eventually I found my way into the rooms. I went to the rooms of NA. I tried to get clean there, and I managed to get off of my drug of choice. So in my mind, I was clean, but actually wasn't. I was actually never clean a day in 5 years because I was still on a whole lot of other medications. But still at that time, I think my willingness, I was desperate but I wasn't willing to do what I needed to do. When they said you need to go to treatment, I was like, no, not happening. And there again, I wasn't really doing it for me. I was doing it because I wanted to get my boyfriend back, which I did. But once I got it back, I stopped going to meetings, and very shortly ended up back on my drug of choice. And then, that kind of progressed for 5 years, and it was just a lot of madness. I kind of created chaos wherever I went in my family's lives, and I would jump around, and then, Joburg was the problem, and then I'd have to come through to Pennington to my parents, and, I'd come here and I'd try and grow cold turkey, and my mom would have to look after me, and I started having these really, really bad seizures. And I feel now, when looking back at it, when I think about what I put my mom through, my dad died from a seizure. And when I think about what she had to see me go through, and she had to watch me go through these seizures and never knowing, if that's going to happen to me, what happened to my dad. And I put her through that, But at that time, I couldn't see how I was hurting anybody. I couldn't see what I was doing, And still, she came and spoke to me about going into treatment, and I was like, nope, I want to do things my way, and I promised her I would get clean, but I needed to go back to Joburg to do it, and I went back to Joburg, and I would try and attempt there again, and it was a cycle of just going back and forth, and and what I didn't realize is no matter how much I moved, I took me with me, and that was just the madness in my life at the time. Until eventually the very, very last stint that I had, I'd moved back up to Pennington again, and I'd made my whole family sick at that point. My stepdad, who is genuinely not an aggressive person, he's quite a loving, kind person, and I'd made him so sick that he physically attacked me. But that's what we do, we make our family sick. And I left again, went back to Joburg and booked myself back into Boksburg Benoni Hospital. I spent another week there in the psychiatric ward. Luckily at that time, I'd managed to detox off of some of the medications, and got to a point where my mom was like, look, my fiance said, look, we can't keep doing this, this can't continue, something's got to change. And he said, if you need to go back to your mom, I don't care if you need to stay there a year, I don't care what it is, but you need to find a way to get better, because this is not healthy for you. Again, I thought Benoni was the problem, and so eventually I came back, and on that day, funny enough, our next door neighbour knew somebody in the fellowship and had arranged a meeting. And they came and spoke to me about going into treatment. And at that stage, I was like, no, I think that's a bit drastic, I know I have a problem, but I'm not that bad. But I couldn't see all the chaos and damage that I had literally just caused. I'd just come out of a psychiatric hospital. But I couldn't see it. And I think I was in just such denial. And then eventually, that night, I tried to overdose. And the next morning, my stepdad had kicked my mom and I out of the house. We ended up staying with my neighbour, and the next morning, my mom was like, here's your bags, they're here to fetch you, and I couldn't understand what she meant, and she had called the house on the hill, and they had come to fetch me. So, if I have to say, I didn't go into treatment willingly. But when I got there, I spent 3 days in isolation, and for me there was just a lot of God in that. There was a lot of God how I ended up at that treatment centre, with it being a non-medication based treatment centre. There was just a lot of synchronicities, a lot of God. They did the AA in their program, which I was familiar with, and it's just, for me, that was really how my journey started, and it was just a beautiful experience. I remember though seeing my car there, and I couldn't understand why. I couldn't understand why my car was there. I thought maybe I'm going to do some service or like, I don't know, take people to meetings, or like, I thought that, okay, well, that's cool. I remember the owner of the facility finally calling in when I eventually went into the house, and he said to me, well, in his British accent, I'll never forget it. I remember him saying to me, yeah, well, I heard you don't understand why your car's here. And I said, no, And he said, well, how did you think you were going to pay for treatments? You're not a medical aid, your family doesn't have the funds to send you here. And at that moment, like, I realized my car, my parents had given my car in as payment, and I thought, not a chance, I'm not giving up my car. And at that stage, I'd lost my job. I had lost I'd used all my money. I had nothing left, my car was all I had left. And I remember him saying to me, well, you can take your car, but your family doesn't want you home. Your sister is an addict, you can't go and live with her, and not even your fiance wants you. So you can go and take your car and live in the streets of Scotland if you like, but that's your choice. And I think at that moment, that was my complete and emotional rock bottom. I realized that I had absolutely nothing left, and I was just tired. I was tired, and I didn't want to continue living the way I didn't want to continue carrying on like this. So I did. I signed my car over, and I thought, well, let me at least give it a try. I've tried everything else. I've exhausted all my options. Let's just see. I think that's sort of where my willingness started. So I went into treatment. I think I kind of procrastinated the first couple of, I remember still thinking about how I'm going to try and manipulate the counselors, and how I'm going to, try to manipulate the system, and, I'm going to kind of run the show here. And I think that you all know how that kind of turned out. My very, very first concern group I ever sat in, they had my number. I got concerned, my very, very first concern group, and I got concerned many times after that. A lot of consequences, I was very, very faulty, which kind of showed me even without some substances, I'm still mad. But yeah, I'm really, really grateful for all the concerns and the consequences, because for me, that is where the growth was. I needed to be shown my reality. I needed that tough love. I needed to break, I needed that denial to be broken, and that's what the house gave me. They needed to show me the love. In other words, they gave me the love that I needed, not the love that I wanted. That's where I kind of started to do the steps. I think I still sort of procrastinated a lot. By life story, I was showing my reality, and I kind of, with that, a shift started to happen. I think things started to change a little bit for me there, because I could sort of see that, my perception of my reality was warped, but it was really only after step 5 that recovery started happening for me. I know some people talk about step 5, they get this pink, fluffy cloud feeling. I didn't get that. That wasn't my experience. I was devastated after my step 5. But for me, from step 6 is where recovery really started happening for me. That's where the program all started making sense, where I could see my defects and things all started coming together. And I kind of really fell in love with this program after that. My relationship started to get better with my family. My stepdad, who was still not talking to me at that stage, had sent a message with my mom to say, he's happy that I'm doing well. And, for me, there again, my connection to God really grew during that time. Coming into treatment, I already had a concept of a higher power, but for me, God is an experience, and I didn't have that connection. I hadn't had that experience of God. And coming into the house from my step 6, that is when I started to actually connect with my higher power. And again, a lot of God moments, a lot of synchronicities, and it was really, really beautiful. But I still remember having a lot of self-doubt, a lot of, I suffered from a lot of self-worth stuff. And I remember them talking about the 3%. And while, they were saying in the class that a lot of people are sitting there and they're probably thinking, that one's not going to make it, that one's not going to make it. At that stage, in my mind, I was going, oh my God, I'm not part of the 3%. I'm not going to make it. I can't do this. Just so much fear. But, and I know at that stage, I think part of me was still holding back, and I knew that I had to completely surrender to the program. and I think it was my very, very last concern group, one of my last concern groups, which was kind of a changing point for me, because I was still at that stage, still a lot of self-pity, victim stuff. Every time I shared about my dad, it would be, a lot of like, woe is me. And somebody pointed out to me, they said to me, do you not think you're using your dad's death as an excuse to stay sick? And I thought, what? And they said, no, well, don't you think you're using your dad's death as an excuse to stay sick? And I was so angry in that moment that the very next day I concerned that person out of anger and resentment. And it was one of those concerns where the whole house, the concern flipped, and the whole house turned, like lifted up their hand and concerned me. And it was, but wow, I needed that. If it wasn't for that concern group, I don't think I'd be where I am today. That was finally when I kind of accepted it. I could accept that, that is what I was doing. And through that, I learned acceptance. I finally accepted that I am a true alcoholic and addict. I accepted a lot of, even the things in my life that I thought were unfair. I accepted that those were the experiences that I needed to go through to get to where I am today. And I'm really grateful for those experiences, the good and the bad. And I'm grateful for this program, because if it wasn't for that, I'm sitting here today just over a year, clean and sober, and I didn't think that would be my reality. And it's all thank you to God and to this program. I've coming into recovery, I've had this year's been incredible. I've made so many friends in fellowship. I've had a beautiful support group. I know if I'm in a mess, back in my last stages of active, I was completely alone, using my room. And now I know that I have 30 to 40 people that I can call at any time if I'm in a mess or if I need, help. And that's really beautiful. I've restored relationships in my family. My stepdad and I have a beautiful relationship today. I have a really, really good relationship with my mom, with my fiance. It's been hard. We do the long distance relationship thing, but it's been, wow, we are in such a good space. And, it's all thanks to this program. I've had 3 incredible sponsors in my life, 2 of them which are sitting here today. And I'm just, that have just been really pillars of strength for me. And, all I can I just have a lot of gratitude sitting here today. I think when it came sort of to my 10 months roundabout, I think I'd become sort of complacent in my recovery. I wasn't really working my program, and just before my 1 year, one of my best friends relapsed, and it's kind of showed me, the power of this disease. This recovery is not promised to everybody. It's promised to those that break the program, and for me, that kind of shifted me back into what I needed to do, and I started getting more honest in my inventories. I just started getting more honest about what's going on for me, and just started really trying to, get involved in the fellowship more. And I'm still sitting here today, and I'm really grateful for that. And I don't know where I'll be a year from now, a week from now, but I know that just for today I'm here, and I'm surrounded by people, like-minded people that I love and care about. And it's all, thank you to the 12-step program, and thanks to Bill Wilson for, for doing this all those years ago. Without that, I wouldn't be where I am. So thanks for letting me share.